Hi, it's Maija here with my 2021 reading statistics. So this video will just be numbers and percents and all that fun stuff. I use a spreadsheet that was created by Brock from Let's Read, but I have done my own modifications to it over the years because I've used it for so long. So with that spreadsheet, I track my acquisitions, my TBR, any upcoming releases, my series progress, and of course my read books. I also have some stats from Storygraph and Goodreads on this video. I use both because I didn't import my Goodreads to Storygraph. I started from scratch, and I also don't track my comics on Storygraph. So I sort of see how many novels and how many books I have read better from there, when on Goodreads I also track my comics. So I'm gonna use stats from both of those sites. Storygraph also doesn't have all the books necessarily, so there might be some Finnish editions, or for example, if it was a Patreon read that I only got from there, it hasn't been published to the wider audience yet, Storygraph might not have it. But anyway, let's move on to the stats. I'm going to talk about my reading in 2021. In 2021, I read 137 books, and that was 25,675 pages. My average rating was 3.3. It's the same as the previous year. It's been that for a long while. It was 3.4 right at the end there, but then I read a couple of 2-star reads at the end of the year. The average length of the book that I read was 192 pages. I read a lot of comics and novellas. I listened to one audiobook in 2021 that was a reread of Heartless by Gail Carriger. The longest book that I read was Plain Bad Heroines by Emily M. Danforth at 623 pages, and the shortest book that I read was a comic that was Love Condemns Her by Hannah Chatani at 16 pages. Okay, and then a couple of Storygraph and Goodreads stats. So let's go for the most popular, the most shelved book, both on Goodreads and Storygraph that I read, was Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. And the least popular book that I read on Goodreads was Love in Space by Niv Sekar, which was shelved by 2 other people. And the least shelved book on Storygraph that I read was Hobgoblin Boots by Tansy Rayner Roberts. The highest read book on Goodreads I read was Curse of Bronze by Tansy Rayner Roberts with a 4.88 average. This might have something to do with the fact that this is only available from the author's Patreon currently, so only fans have read it. And the highest read book that I read on Storygraph was Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation Volume 1 by Mo Xiao Tongxiu. The first book that I read in 2021 was Of Dragons, Feasts and Murders by Aliette de Bodard. I gave it 3 stars. And the last book I read in 2021 was Nothing But Blackened Teeth by Cassandra Kho, which I gave 2 stars. I read the most books in February. I read 34 books because I read a manga a day in February. Apart from that month, March and May were the best months with 13 books. So it's a bit of a difference there. I also read the most pages in February, of course, with 6,668 pages. It was really hard to say. My average amount of reads per month was 11.5, and my average page count a month was 2,140. My average read pages a day were 70 pages, and I took on average 3 days to finish a book. Once again, comics, novellas. And now we're getting into the nitty-gritty stats, the percents. Brace yourself. Let's start with genre. Surprising no one, I read 41% fantasy. I read 26% horror, 9% science fiction, 7% contemporaries, and 4% fairy tales. And then the rest are mystery crime, non-fiction, adventure, historical fiction, romance, classics, and comedy. For classics, if I can't put the classic into any genre that I already had on my spreadsheet, I just put it under classics, but the other genres have classics inside them as well. Then we go to format. I have separated this to graphic works and non-graphic works, like regular novels and stuff. So 42% of what I read were physical graphic works, so like graphic novels and manga in physical format. 28% were ebooks, 18% were physical books, 11% were digital graphic works, so digital manga comics, and 1% was audiobook. Heartless. So I think this is the first time I've read more ebooks than physical books in a year. Also, you can really see from these stats that my reading suffered during the latter half of the year. I basically could only focus on comics, so that's why that is so high. Then moving on to the length of the stuff that I read, 58% were graphic works. I know that doesn't tell anything about the lengths of the actual graphic novels that I read, but that's how I've done this stat so far. I haven't really figured out how to put graphic works by length in this anymore, but 58% were graphic works, 20% were novels, 9% were novellas, 7% were short fiction, so that's anything shorter than a novella, 4% were anthologies, so that's collections with multiple authors in them. That was mostly magazine issues with stories that I read, and then 2% were collections, so one author short story collections. As to the age demographic, the age group that the books were targeted towards, 80% of what I read was for adults, 12% was young adult, and 7% was middle grade. The next stat is where was the book from? So 42% of the books I read were from the library. In 2020, I think it was 38%, so it's gone up a bit. 22% were from my shelf, meaning ebooks and physical books that I've owned before 2021. So there's a separate stat, 20% of books I bought and read in 2021. 9% were from subscriptions like Patreon, and 7% were free, like gifts, free ebooks, review copies, or borrowed from Reija from the Bookfinch. For 2022, I've actually made a little bit of a change in the spreadsheet. I separated the shelf category to ebooks that I've owned before this year and then physical books that I want this year, just to see, do I actually get my physical TBR down? Language is a simple graph. 89% of what I read was in English and 11% was in Finnish. Then there's two stats categories for authors that I just keep loosely to track my reading. So the information for these stats either comes from the author's Twitter bio or from their own personal website. And if I can't easily find the information, I don't go digging around for it. So these are very loose. The first one is author pronouns. 63% were she, her, 20% he, him, 7% unknown, 4% they, them, 4% he and she. This is mostly like comic themes. And then there's 2% various, so an anthology with contributors using various pronouns. And then 1% is other, anything not listed here. And then the final loose author stat is how much I read from authors of color and white authors. So 64% of what I read was written by authors of color, 27% white authors, 4% author of color and white author teams. This is comic teams again. And then the rest is unknown. You might be thinking that that's everything, but I have more. I have book buying stats. I bought 51 books last year, and I read 49% of those purchases. Let's go to the acquisition format. I bought 53% ebooks, 27% physical books, 14% physical graphic works, and 6% ebook, so digital graphic works. Out of the money that I spent 71% on physical books and 29% on ebooks. So even though I bought over 50% ebooks, I didn't spend a lot of money on them. Of course, physical books are more expensive. Then we're moving on to buying location. In my previous year's stats videos, I tracked every separate store. Now I just divide stuff between Amazon-owned online stores, non-Amazon-owned online stores, physical stores, and then gift or giveaway. So 51% of the books that I bought came from online stores that were not Amazon owned. Last year I bought a Kobo, so that lessened the amount of ebooks that I bought from Amazon. And 29% of what I bought came from online sources that were owned by Amazon. That's Comixology, the Kindle store, like few ebooks from sales or from authors who are Kindle exclusive. I also had a couple of pre-orders from Book Depository. 18% were from a store in Finland. I also had a category for store abroad, but I haven't used that for 2 years. The gift category is only 2%, that's one Christmas gift. I think I made this change to Amazon-owned, non-Amazon-owned in 2020, so I've been tracking it like this for 2 years. And I actually in 2020 learned that you can't rate books on Amazon if you haven't spent at least $50 there in a year. So I couldn't add reviews to the couple of self-published books that I wanted to add to help them out. Are you ready? The final stat. I bought the most books in January with 10 books and the least books in July with 1 book. We have come to the end. That was all my reading and book buying stats for 2021. I hope some of you like this sort of stuff like I do, let me know in the comments if you do statistics like these, or just let me know that you were here by leaving an emoji or a smiley face, and I'll see you in my next video.